Welcome back to the Coach's Corner, sponsored by Premier Lending. I'm Devin Dubuque.
And I'm Coach Rick.
And we're here to provide proven strategies to help you build great success as a loan officer in today's market. So, Coach, we left off last week and we talked about the one-page business plan. This week, I think we talked about focusing on finding your why.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
You know, it's finding kind of like your origin story. You know, what is making you do what you do and what makes you who you are. And a lot of people, it takes some digging to find out what their why is. But the reason it's important to know your why is to build a real relationship with a realtor or with a business partner. You need to understand their why and they need to understand yours. So a lot of times what you need to do is you need to take your business partner and you need to be able to, in kind of a short story form, tell your story why. You know, somebody's why might be, for example, you know, I've got 2 kids in college. My wife wants to see Italy. We want to be able to go on vacation with the kids twice a year because they're not going to be home too much longer. You know, they're growing up. And if that's your why, okay, that's a good why. Sometimes you got to dig a little deeper. You got to ask a few more questions. Well, why do you want to do those things? You know, well, I want to enforce my relationship. I want to show them the world. Okay, but why else? Well, you know, I need to make more money to do that. Okay, good. What else would that money do for you? You know, it'll free up time. Okay, so time's important to you. Yeah. And sometimes to get to, I want to do this for my kids and my wife for these reasons, you have to start all the way back to, well, I want to make more money. Why? Yeah. And so if you keep asking why, or if you keep asking people questions that make them delve deeper into what their why is, they can eventually walk themselves through and come up with, I call, the origin story. And it's important to know that story because you're going to have to tell that to every business partner down the road as you're building a personal relationship with them.
Yeah, you know, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it can even go deeper than that, right? Because, you know, we're talking about the why on a monetary scale. And we know that, you know, that monetary scale is just the means to getting what we really want, right? And what you're talking about here is what do we really want? We want time with our family, right? We want to know that we can take those vacations with confidence, that's not going to hurt us. It's not going to put us in any type of financial struggle, you know. But I even take the why further than that, you know, and I think this is really deeper because our why should also go back to, you know, what makes us tick, right? Like what makes us get up in the morning and do what we do. And there to serve our families is part of that, but a lot of it goes even deeper. It goes back to childhood, right? You know, I can tell you right now, when I went and did this strategy and looked to find my why, you know, I was raised by a single mother. And I watched her year after year after year struggle to put herself through college to further her employment and gain, you know, the potential for more income to be able to support me. And I watched her struggle to make ends meet by working multiple jobs in between taking college courses. And that left me home without mom, and I didn't have a dad. And so I had to do a lot of, you know, raise myself, right? You know, coming home from school and doing chores and me putting dinner on the table, right? At certain ages.
And nobody being at football and nobody being at baseball and nobody, you know, walking home from, you know, the fields.
Walking
getting
to school,
a ride from somebody
from
else.
School. Yeah, exactly. And so now that takes me back to, well, what do I not want? I don't want to have that struggle myself, but more importantly, I don't want my kids to experience that. I want my kids to know that dad is going to be home and that dad's going to be present and that we're going to be able to take those trips. And we can do it without you know, having that concern of the financial stability, but more importantly, that just dad's there, right? And I think that's where you can get really deep with the why, because if you take it back to, well, how did I get to this place in the first place, right? As to what drives me to do what I do every single day, and you frame that into, well, what was my upbringing, right? What instilled in me that I need to be this person or I need to do these things? And I think that's really going deep with the why. And let me tell you something, when you share that story, with an agent partner, right? They immediately know that you care, right? That you care about what you're doing and you're doing it for a greater purpose. My why goes further than that, Coach, because, for me personally, it's not just about what I can do to benefit myself and my kids, but I also want to help others. I want to see, the people that we empower, or the loan officers on our teams, right? The agents that we serve, getting more time back with their families. And if I can help them achieve those goals, man, that's what drives me every day, right? What drives me every day is helping families, right? Serving the people that we know from across the country that maybe don't think they can buy a house, and showing them how, and then empowering loan officers with the tools and the techniques and the technology to serve those families, so we can take those families and make them homeowners, right? And give more time back to our real estate agents, right? That's one of the things we talk about all the time is we do the communication that we do to give more time to the agents so they can get out and create successes for themselves because they know that we're following up on their leads. So I think the why is a big part of all that, right? It's not just the monetary value, because that's important, but it's what drives us to do that. And then once we apply that, how do we make an impact with it, right?
Well, that's the big question. So what's really important about the why to understand is whether you have a why or not, you're only going to connect with about 25% of the people that you talk to. And if you have that why, and like you were able to explain your why, and I used the example I used, you can increase that from almost 25 to 50%, because half of the people will understand what you're talking about, whether they are in that same situation or not. If they're in the same situation, I've seen statistics where it can go up to like 90% that they'll do business with you. So regardless of whether you have a why or not, you're only going to click with 25. Focus on finding it, nurturing relationships, with those 25%. But as you start to go deeper with some of these people, you can make them lifelong, referral partners.
That's right.
And so the number one thing is, once you know yours and you're able to talk to a realtor or a referral partner about it, you have to be able to get them to tell you yours. So you have to have some real clarity in your why story. And that's why I kept saying you have to keep saying why, and you have to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And so when they understand that your origin story is your core values,
that's right,
your personal beliefs, then they understand what matters most to you. Okay. And as you get them and you start to guide them, you start using statements that kind of define that part of your personality.
That's right.
So as you use these stories to connect, you engage emotionally rather than just, transactionally, I guess is the best way to put it. So once you focus on what each of your whys are, you know what your different attributes are, you know what drives each of you differently. And your why and somebody else's whys might be totally different. For example, at my age, I've accomplished most of what I set out to do with my why. And sometimes it's hard, when you're in your 60s, you got to start thinking about, what is my new why? Well, you know what a lot of people's new why is when I hit my age, it's, I better be good. I want to get up there, So, you start doing things differently than what you were doing originally.
Absolutely.
But
I love that you said
you become authentic is the big thing.
That's right.
Once you're authentic, you focus on being better together, which I know you love to say, rather than being different. So you actually quit pitching to people and you just start connecting with them.
That's it.
And I've got some notes and stuff here that I keep, so I'm just moving it over where I can see it.
Well, and
I'm not as smart as I sound.
Yeah. Well, and I love, what you said about, getting the why, from your business partners and the people that you're building relationships with, because it's so important. Think about, getting to know a new friend for the first time, right? We really get to know who they were from childhood and why they love the things they do. And that's how we decide how we become in common with one another. And, to give an example, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and, at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure that we were really gaining traction. And so, I said, hey, so I got to ask you, what's your why? Like, why do you do this? And it was, well, I want to make, enough money to be able to buy these really cool cars that I want. Right. Well, that's cool. But why do you want to do that? Well, because, I think it's important to be in competition, and, I want to be the best at the team too. Yeah. But why do you want to be the best on the team? Well, I think it's important to, basically always be improving and upping your game so that you can work on the top level. And I said, finally, because we kept going, it was almost the same thing every time. And I said, yeah, but let me ask you another question. Let's just take this a little bit deeper. Why are you so competitive? Let's go back to when you were a kid and you were just starting, to know who you were. What bred that competitive nature, right? What made you so competitive? Well, I had 4 brothers, right? Yeah. And, we were always competing against one another. And guess what? There it is, right? And now the moment that we unfolded that, the conversation took a whole different direction. We were laughing, we were having a great time, and we immediately connected because we got to the root of the why, right?
Yep.
And I think that's when we're building these relationships with our friends and our business partners and, the consumers that we're serving. If we get a chance to know their why, it really helps us connect and build a long-lasting, meaningful relationship. And I think that's what it's all about, right?
What's really interesting, Devin, is when you're articulating your why and your core values and you're starting to connect, that's great. But you can utilize your why while you're prospecting, while you're still trying to find that 25%, whether they fit into that 25% or more. So if you embrace this as a means to connect while you're prospecting, you can actually bring your prospects and those people in faster than, making the call, talking to them, begging, whatever you're doing to try to get business in. If you hit them with the why and you were able to dig theirs out quickly, hey, I don't want to meet with you, Rick. I'm too busy. Oh my God, that's fantastic. Why are you so busy? What are you doing? Be inquisitive, want to know everything. The person, there's 2 rules in our business. The person who makes the most phone calls makes the most money, but the person who asks the most questions usually is ahead of the guy that just asked a lot of questions. So it's kind of interesting. So you have to utilize the why.
You want to be genuinely curious when you're having these communications. Well, I want to bring something up too, because you mentioned something, and, we hear this a lot. Originators a lot of the times feel like they have to have the best of everything to be able to win the relationship, right? And you got to think about it from this perspective. If I'm a realtor, I'm hearing the same thing over and over again. Hey, my name is John Smith, and I have the best rates, the best process. I'm the fastest in the market, right? And we can close every loan, right? And they hear this from everybody time and time and time again. In fact, I've heard loan officers, or I've heard agents that I've sat down with go, okay, so what's the pitch, right? And this is what's expected in this industry. But when we take this on a different approach and we come at it from the point of, no, I want to connect with you. I see what you're doing. You're amazing. You're doing awesome things in this industry, and I'd love to learn from the best, right? I like to put myself, in a playing field with the people that are at the top of the game, and that's what I want to know is how you're doing what you're doing. And we start getting into that why. This is where we start to build relationships. But guess what, Coach? I think that's a topic for the next one, right? We've talked about the why and why it's so important. I think the next one we talk about, how do you start to connect with agents and build that 25%? How do we get there, right? What's the roadmap to building great relationships with agents? So I think this is maybe a great place for us to stop today, right? We've unfolded the why and why the why is so important, right? And let's catch up on the next one. Let's talk about how do we go out there and start building those relationships? What does that look like? What do you think, Coach? Is that a good one to go to?
Yeah, that sounds good because, with everything we just talked about and what you just said, the one thing that's really funny is when an agent has to ask you, well, what about your programs and your pricing and stuff like that? And you've been talking to them, for a half hour for days, and they say, well, how do you close your loans? And it's like, hey, look, all that stuff, all those questions you have, all those things that other people say to you that they do this, they've got this rate, that, blah, blah, blah. I got all that, or I wouldn't have even picked up the phone to call you because you're such a good producing agent. How could I call you if I didn't have that stuff?
That's right.
To me, that's just that's the first base of doing business with you. You know,
Yeah.
I want to get the second, third, and home with you so that
Let's get to know each other.
so we get to know each other. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Because
next
I don't
week
know
we
about
can
you,
work
Coach,
on that.
but I like to do business with people I know, like, and trust. And at the end of the day, I need to get to know you a little bit before I know that you're somebody I want to work with, right? Let's get to know each other a little bit, and then we can talk about what business looks like. I love it. I love it. So we're going to talk about how to build those relationships, how to actually get started. We know the why and what to ask. Let's talk about how we actually go about doing it on the next episode of Coach's Corner. But today, guys, we appreciate you tuning in, and we'd love it if you subscribe, comment. If you want, some great content, if there's something specific you're looking for, Coach and I are always here to help out. Right? We want to help you guys build proven strategies that will help you build that success and thrive in any market. So this is Coach's Corner, and I'm Devin Dubuque.
I'm Rick Koenig.
And
Or
we'll see
Coach
you on
Rick.
the next one.